Welcome to Flipside of Crypto. Joining me today is Oscar Yeung of Convergence. Welcome, Oscar.
Thanks for having me here.
Oscar is the CEO of Convergence, a cutting-edge project which might change the way we approach crypto-native assets and real-world assets. In your own words, Oscar, what does Convergence do?
Yeah, so Convergence is an interchangeable asset protocol. So a bit of background about myself. I used to be in the tokenization space with a leading security token issuer in Hong Kong called Liquify. And from there, we really had a vision of bringing real-world assets on-chain. A lot of times people invest in Bitcoin, Ethereum, digital native assets. But in the ideal world, blockchain can be used for much more than that. Can gain access to real world investments such as private companies, real estate, or private investment opportunities. And Convergence is here to offer the full product suite from offering platform to exchange platform to gain access, to democratize access to all sorts of investment opportunity globally.
Oscar, this sounds very exciting because the ability to essentially not worry about, okay, is there a trading pair or not, is really good for the average consumer. But could you elaborate a bit, what lengths did you have to go to in order to create this possibility?
Yeah, so it comes from a new innovative business model. From the very beginning, we saw how Uniswap is able to revolutionize trading, where you can have 24/7 unlimited liquidity pairs. And from there, we evolved in what about changing the trading pairs into what we are used to, say, such as USDT, USDC, or even Ethereum, to things that are kind of in real world. And therefore, we can create that new marketplace that doesn't exist before in the traditional sense.
Interesting. And could you just explain to me, as we were doing research for this interview, you mentioned in previous interviews that there are inherent problems with security tokens, right? And could you just explain it to us at a 5-year-old level and at a bit higher level, if possible?
Yeah, 5-year-old level is a little complicated, but if I have to say security token, it's something that represents ownership of something in the real world. And for a 5-year-old, it would be like, if I give you this token on the internet, you have access to this teddy bear. And that's pretty much what it is. But in an intermediate sense, what it is proving real-world ownership on assets. As I mentioned before, companies that you have access to right now, like stocks, that exists in stock exchange. But private companies, art collection, all of that is in a very illiquid market where it's trade between brokers. And so what we're doing is we're trying to create that transparency so anyone can have access to buy it, sell it, or trade it anytime they want. So some of the problems that we face is, on a custodian level, how do we ensure that the asset is actually backed by the tokens are actually backed by the token, and the technology level, how does it all integrate, and how do we make a system where everyone kind of has visibility on who owns what? In the sense of, let's say, equities, you have a company secretary that is in charge of who owns how many percentage, and a token world, how do we replicate that whole thing in on-chain is what Convergence is essentially doing.
Interesting. So essentially, Convergence is not only a gateway, but you're also, because of your technology, are able to check whether or not it's actually backed by something, in other words.
That's right. In the future timeline or in the pipeline, we have an investment council that ensures that everything that's on Convergence is backed, and we'll do due diligence on each project as well to make sure that we're giving the actual exposure and not something that as people claim to have. In the token sense, it's very easy, right? Everything is stored on chain, but the gap between real world and the on-chain world is a little bit intransparent, and that's what we're trying to fix.
The 5-year-old in me is thanking you because now I can finally understand what is the real inherent issue with STOs. And Convergence seems to be doing quite a good job in solving it. Now I have to ask, so you're live right now. You're actually allowing people to actually have this cross-chain, cross-asset movement come along. And that comes in with DeFi, actually. The explosion of DeFi corresponds with Convergence coming onto the scene. And could you just elaborate, how do you see the DeFi market right now?
Yeah, I think this is one of the more exciting times in crypto market where a lot of institutional money are coming in. You see the MicroStrategy, you see the Tesla. A lot of money is flowing into the market, not just because they're here for the quick flip. Most of the institutions look at it in a 10, 20-year period, and they see the potential of this technology to kind of change how traditional finance are made. And I think one of the really interesting things is how does the business model evolve from there? In the traditional business before, you're looking at revenues, you're looking at the foothold, and in the internet era, you're now looking at number of users. But then in DeFi, how does this evolve and how does those metrics evolve? Because they're so easy to capture the attention globally if anyone has internet access, they have their own wallet. So you see that with some of the synthetic assets, some of the lending protocols. So I think that's definitely one of the exciting times in DeFi. More kind of closer to the convergence is that regulations are starting to monitor crypto and blockchain industry. And I think that's a good thing. I think there needs to be some sort of regulations to look after the market where users are essentially blindsided in a lot of things. And what we want to do is something that is very long-term, with real-world assets being one of the investment vehicles. In the current market, we see that most of the coins or tokens are following the trend of Bitcoin, right? If Bitcoin goes up, everything kind of follows suit. And if vice versa, if it goes down, it crashes. But for investments globally, it doesn't really work that way. The best way is everything is very diversified. You have regional exposure, you have different sectors, and a healthy market that we see coming along and where we can provide some assets that relate to different parts of the world is to have this exposure all put on chain. And I think that's kind of where we see the future of DeFi going.
Yeah, and although it's an exciting future, could you just elaborate for our viewers at home? What will be Convergence's role in the DeFi space? Could you just give us some examples, please?
Yeah, so most of what we do, we call the signature Conf O, which is Conf offering, and Conf X, which is our decentralized exchange. We focus on fractionalization of assets. So if there's a certain, let's say, SAFT or private investments that you need a certain threshold to get into, can we break it down to smaller pieces, treat it as a token and break it down so anyone that has access to Convergence can buy a small bit of it? And once there's a liquidity event for a private company, let's say an IPO, or for a token project, they get listed, and then you can split out the profits for these small fractions. And I think a lot of people are cut out of these opportunities that VC funds or private equity funds have access to, and we basically can have a network from the offering platform that says we have this deal, that private deal that everyone can take a look and can participate in, and break it down for them to essentially trade at day one.
Yeah, that's an exciting opportunity and exciting future as the DeFi space matures a bit, goes into this stage of rapid adoption, hopefully, if the overbearing regulators do not put another chink in the armor, so to speak. Now, I have to ask, you talked about token fractionalization, but that's not all you do. You also help with NFT fractionalization, correct?
That's exactly right. I think NFT to us is a huge potential as the space continues to grow. And especially now there's new business model on kind of play to earn models on NFTs. So the collectible values of NFTs cannot be disregarded. That being said, a lot of the high market, the ones that everyone chases for in terms of rarity, are very expensive. So what Convergence can essentially do is treat it as the same. How do we take a whole NFT, have their ownership fractionalized so then people can buy bits and pieces of it and trigger kind of buyback costs in the future? So we actually have interesting work that's coming out in the next few months where a great artwork that has been bought by individuals is going to be fractionalized and put on Convergence. And after a certain time period or a certain price trigger, that artwork will be sold and the NFT profits will be distributed back to Convergence user according to kind of their token holdings. And I think the same concept can be applied to many, many different investment opportunities. But NFT for sure is one field that we're very closely in.
Very exciting. And the question would be, are there any limits to what, because essentially an NFT can be not only artwork, although it's most associated with art, gaming, visual content, but it could also be, for example, music. It could also be even a deed to a house. The possibilities are endless. So in essence, it would be possible for Convergence to, well, let's just say, shard or fractalize every single asset, so to speak.
Yes, that's exactly correct. And I think that's where the field is moving to and why NFT is becoming such a central attention for the crypto space, basically. Because yes, it can represent artwork, but it can essentially represent anything in the world, but you need the right infrastructure in place. And so while this infrastructure is developing in this market, we're also seeing the potential of how that can expand beyond, tying one thing to another, and then you fractionalize it. Maybe this one NFT is represented by 100 tokens. How does the governance work? How does the kind of relationship between different token holders, can they trade it? And this is kind of the infant stage of what's happening in the market. And the possibility, I think, just being artwork and gaming is just the beginning. How it represents different things is going to be the future growth of the space in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Very exciting. And for our viewers at home, please comment down below. Which NFTs have you actually bought, are interested in buying, and would you be interested in actually fractalization, to own a part of something, or would you like to own a whole of something? Because there was this debate between some of our researchers. People kind of have this psychological hurdle. They want to own a whole Bitcoin, not a fraction of it. And that's why they go for lower cap coins, who, you can buy hundreds of them, even sometimes thousands. Some of them even have doggies on them, so it's quite fun to own some of them. Now, do you yourself hold any NFTs which are, let's just say, in fractions, or are you not an NFT holder yourself?
Currently, I'm not an NFT holder myself, but I invest in kind of NFT-related projects. And from our thesis, it's more getting in the ground level to understand how the mechanism works to support companies that do the same. And so for our offering, we can actually kind of have private sale tokens of NFT related companies offered to our users. And you're right, I think the community is very important to us, and we can source all sorts of different assets no matter what it is and offer a fraction of it to our users. But essentially it's what do people want and what can they not get. I think people that buy lower cap or smaller notional value tokens are missing a picture that you don't need a full Bitcoin. Having 0.99 versus having the full one doesn't make that big of a difference. But psychologically, I get that there is that component. In the end, the art space or the collectible market has been kind of growing exponentially, and having a piece of one that's very collectible that will hold its value over time is more important than having a whole piece of something that essentially might be a gamble.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Now, pre-ICO tokens. Actually, as we were doing our research, it seems that it would be possible to use a SpaceX pre-IPO token and swap it into, for example, an NFT token or into a Doge, and then that Doge buy an ICO token. So in the convergence world, it's all possible, correct?
It's all interchangeable. For ICO, I think what we call it, the first offering is called pre-IDO. IDO basically, is initial decentralized offering of a token. But for us, what we trade is redeemable tokens for future. Let's say our first project is called pre-IDO for Lithium, which is a project coming out in a few days. The market basically extends that private investors have access to these tokens. And a lot of us retails only have to snatch it on the exchange or decentralized exchange. What if some part of that where they're locked up but have much better terms can be put on Convergence? And that's kind of what we do, and we'll continue doing that for different offerings on chain, for different blockchain as well. So we're exploring with Solana, Avalanche, Moonbeam, every sort of token that we can have access to. We essentially act as a bridge from kind of the ETH-based tokens, which is locked, to a future tokens that is another blockchain. So that's where the market is going for us, and the future development of how we bridge different cross-chain assets from Ethereum to other chains.
Yeah, and that kind of beautifully entered the last question of what developments were upcoming for the project. So essentially, more interoperability, more exchanges, more scalability for the project. Is there anything else viewers at home should be looking out for?
I think we'll be launching the next offering very soon, so stay in touch for that. A lot of what we do is kind of crowdsource from our community, hearing feedbacks, and anything that the community or the users want to have exposure to, we can essentially source it for them and provide it based on the investment council decision. And so what we're providing is a platform for the community that wants different things that they can otherwise get access to. Let's say a very highly priced NFT, we can essentially have that ready and sourced and sold as a fraction to all audience involved.
Absolutely. And last question, the show wouldn't be called the flip side of crypto if we didn't have a flip side. And this one will be a tricky one. In a sentence or two at max, what would you say is your biggest worry about the DeFi market at the moment?
That's a great question. I think it's the over-regulations to stifle innovations. You see that the financial institutions have been in this space for a very long time. They have been acting as the middleman. By having DeFi, it's almost taking some of the power away from them. So while I really do appreciate financial institution looking into blockchain, there needs to be some collaborations to make sure that DeFi will exist and to continue to grow in a sustainable manner, rather than having the old players kind of remake themselves and take over the same industry and take their own same middleman cut.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Oscar. This was a very enlightening interview. Now for our viewers at home, make sure to visit Convergence. We'll leave the links below. And also make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.